guys, so in my previous video I talked about starting a 500 capacity chicken house on a budget. Now if you didn't watch it, I'll leave a link to that video right here so you can check it out. But what you need to understand is that the main conclusion was that we are going to be doing broilers and there were shortcuts to be made. But in the end, we all don't just start farms simply to start it on a budget. In the end, you're looking at, is it actually profitable for me? How much money am I going to be making? So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys how much profit you actually expect to be making from a budget farm, a 500 chicken budget farm. So stick around right through to the end because there are a lot of things that are going to be discussed, a lot of variables that you need to understand. So first, before we go into that, we need to first understand the cost, because in the last video we didn't share the cost. We shared the shortcuts you would make and everything you would do, but we didn't share the absolute cost of how much it would cost. So we have to first understand the cost. The second thing is that I'm going to use US dollars. All the currencies, all the figures are going to be in US dollars, so you can convert them to whatever currency in your country. And the third thing is that the prices are going to be typically where I am, and that's Uganda. Now the market in Uganda for chickens, I wouldn't say is like the hugest, but it's also not very small compared to a lot of countries. So I would say, it's good enough to compare. The feed prices here are considerably cheaper compared to a lot of other countries, but again, even the end product is not so much expensive. So I feel like it would be something that would give a proper estimation. But again, it's important that you actually look for the prices depending on which country you're in, so that you put it in a better context for your country. So when you go to the cost, the first thing that you're going to have to put a price to is going to be the chicken house itself. So if you're going to be raising broilers, 500 broilers, you're going to have to raise them in a chicken house. So first thing is the size of the house. You're going to space them between 12 and 13 birds per square meter. And what that means is that you're going to need a chicken house that measures about 10 meters by 4 meters. 40 square meters. 40 square meters is enough for you to put birds at 12.5 birds per square meter. And you'll be at 500 broilers inside that chicken house. You're talking about commercial broilers, not dual purpose birds, not about layers, typically commercial broilers inside that house. That would be very sufficient. Now, when we talk about the actual construction of the chicken house, the materials that you're going to use, number one, you're going to have to use poles, like we said earlier on. Then, for my costing, the sides, I used iron sheets, just like you're seeing on my chicken house here. Actually, I'll put an insert of a chicken house that I built exactly like the one that I think would be an ideal one. This is the chicken house that I built and constructed earlier on for my grandmother. But this would be a perfect chicken house. It's very cheap. So you use iron sheets at the bottom, just like this one, and then you'll have mesh for the top. That's enough, certainly enough. You just put a roof over it. Here I have chain link and wire mesh. That's all you would need. That would be typically very enough. So those are the costs that I used, but you can even make it a little bit cheaper, because instead of using iron sheeting like me, you can use wood, you can use timber. Remember that these things also come with their complications. If you're using wood and timber, it means that cleaning it for the next batch is going to be complicated. And if you're doing broilers, cleaning is quite often. So you want to use a material that you can be able to work with. But if you're working on a budget, then you'll have to struggle and suffer to clean properly, but reduce the cost. So when it comes to the cost of the chicken house, you're going to pay about 220 US dollars. For me, that was the cost that I got for a 10 by 4 chicken house using iron sheeting. If you use wood and wooden offcuts, tree offcuts, it becomes even cheaper. Next up is the equipment that you're going to be using inside the chicken house. So when we start with the chicks, when they are still babies, you're going to use smaller drinkers. So the chick drinkers, you'll need about maybe 7 of them. 7 of them would be sufficient, and the total cost of the 7 drinkers would be about $13.24. Next up would be the chick feeders. The chick feeders are going to use are the small wooden troughs. They are wooden, small and long. Those are quite cheap, honestly, very, very cheap. And if you're going to be using those, it's only going to cost you about $6.76 for what's enough to fit your chicken house. And then next up would be the adult feeders. So the adult feeders will also be constructed from wood. They are wooden troughs. You'll place them inside the chicken house, and for that it will come to about 15 US dollars. So the thing that you need to understand with the wooden feeders and the drinkers is that they waste food a bit. You'll have a bit of wastage of feed, so you need to monitor them very well. Don't overfill them, so you need to make sure that you fill them a bit more often. You come back a bit more often to make sure that you put food inside there, because if you overfill them, to make sure that you don't come back very often, then the chickens will keep, pouring the food down, and whatever they pour in the litter, they usually don't eat. So you want to make sure that you put a bit less feed, but put it more often, come back more often so that they don't spill food. And then next up would be the adult drinkers. Now, the adult drinkers are typically very improvised. They are not drinkers that you're going to buy from a shop. These you can actually make yourself. I've actually made a video on this channel. I'll leave a link to that video right here, which shows how you can make very cheap low-cost adult drinkers. You'll usually just buy jerry cans from a shop or somewhere and then just cut them, formulate a drinker and use it. So these, enough to feed your chickens, would cost you only about $10 US. Only $10 would be enough for you to buy the material that you actually need to make these drinkers. The next step would be the litter inside the chicken house. For litter, you can use different kinds of litter. You can use wood shavings, you can use coffee husks, you can use rice husks, depending on what's available and cheaper to you. Yeah. So for me, where I am right now, the cheapest option is actually wood shavings. You would need maybe 5 bags maximum inside that area, and that would cost you about $5.40. Next up is the chickens themselves. So we've now left the equipment. Next up is the chickens themselves. Now with chickens, you can't make shortcuts. You certainly can't make shortcuts. You need to make sure that you get the very best quality of chickens available, because if you don't, the chickens are just going to eat your food and never put on the weight that you require. So make sure that you get chickens from a proper breeder so that the chickens are good, they're not sickly, they're not, falling sick and causing you problems. You want the very best quality, the very best that you can supply to the clients. So when it comes to the 500 broilers, it would cost you roughly $351 US and 35 cents. Next up would be the charcoal. So you need something to use to heat the chicken house, and usually the most energy efficient vis-a-vis cost source of heat inside the chicken house is usually charcoal. And with charcoal, you'll need about 2 bags, depending on the quality of the charcoal. It could maybe get to 3 or 4, but if you have good quality charcoal, you only need 2 bags because you're only going to brood for about 2 weeks. The area that you're heating up is not so big, so you don't need very huge stoves. So for charcoal, it would cost you about $16 US and 22 cents. Next up are the vitamins. Now, what are vitamins for? At the beginning, as soon as you bring in the chickens, you're going to have to give them vitamins to reduce the stress. And then after that, every time you do vaccinations, you actually give them water that contains vitamins, because vaccines stress chickens. Vaccines are usually a small dose of the disease itself. So you don't want to keep the chickens very stressed. So in order to minimize the effects of stress on the birds, you're going to have to give them vaccines. So you're going to need about 2 liters of vitamins, which you're going to give the chickens right for the beginning and also after vaccination. About 2 liters would be sufficient. And these 2 liters would cost you about $16 US and 24 cents. Next up are the vaccines themselves. Now, vaccines are another place where you can't compromise. You can't compromise and get the worst quality or even mediocre vaccines. You need to make sure that the vaccines you're getting are good quality vaccines, because if you get terrible vaccines, you give these vaccines to your chickens, the vaccines are not effective, they're not working for the chickens, your chickens are going to get sick, you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose the money you put into the structure, into the birds, the food, everything. So you want to make sure that you get the best quality vaccines that you can actually get. And so you're going to need 2 doses of NCDIB, usually 2 rounds, because the very first one you'll get when the birds have been given at the hatchery. So you're going to need 2 doses of NCDIB. NCD is Newcastle disease. And then the second one that you're going to need is Gumboro, also 2 doses. So about 4 different vaccines you're going to have to give to the chickens. And this would cost about $10 US and 81 cents. The other thing that you need to know is that the figures I've given for vaccines are for 1,000 doses, because for me where I am, it's impossible for me to access vials that are 500 doses. I've only found 1,000 doses, and you can't get 500 doses. So you have to buy the vaccine for 1,000 doses. You understand? Get 1,000 doses. Of course, you'll mix and then get off simply enough water that would amount to 500 doses. That's what you have to do. But don't give the birds less vaccine than they actually require. It's better you buy more, a little bit more expensive. It's $10, guys, $10 and 81 cents. So it's not too much, but it's very important. The next thing would now be the feed itself. So when it comes to feeding the chickens, there are 2 main types of feed you're going to give the birds. Some people give 3, but more commonly people give 2. The first one is the starter feed, which you give for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, it will be the grower feed, which you give from usually day 15 up to when you cull the flock. If you're going to be culling it early, maybe 35 days, you'll give it the grower feed. So the starter feed, the birds will consume about 542 grams per bird for the starter feed. That's the 2 weeks, the beginning 2 weeks. If you convert that to kilograms, for the 500 birds, that means that you're going to consume about 291 kilograms total consumption of the feed. And then the cost of the starter feed is roughly around 49 cents per kilogram. So what that means is that the total cost of the feed, the starter feed, is going to be around $141 and 57 cents. And the next step is the grower feed that you're going to give to the birds till the point of selling them. So for the grower feed, each bird will consume about 2,810 grams. Or if put in kilograms, that means that's 2 kilograms and 810 grams. That's what every bird is going to consume. So if you convert that into kilograms for all the 500 birds, that takes it to about 1,405 kilograms for the 500 birds. And then the price per kilogram of the grower feed is about 41 cents per kilogram. And so when you convert this into the total cost of the 1,405 kilograms, that takes it to about $549 and 59 cents. So when it comes to the feed, there are a few assumptions that we're going to take for us to get to these figures. The first thing is that you're mixing the feed yourself. Yeah, for me right here, I'm using a premix. That's what got me to that cost. So I have a premix, and then I add my own soya cake, and then I add my own maize bran and my own broken maize in order to make the feed. The premix usually will have the other micronutrients that are needed for the birds. So those ones I'm not buying personally, but I'm trusting a company which is supplying me the premix to make that feed. It brings it to a really cheap price compared to, for example, using a big concentrate. Yeah, that's the advantage. The other thing that I'm going to assume is that you bought maize when the price was low and actually kept it. So the price of maize in this formulation or in this cost is actually quite low. So you buy during harvest time and then store to utilize when the price goes up. Also, the other thing that I'm assuming is that we are keeping the birds up to day 35. So if I'm talking about the grower feed is up to day 35. Day 35 means about 5 weeks. You understand? For us here in Uganda, that will be about 2.1 kilograms live weight of the birds, 2.1 kilograms. When you slaughter that, that gets to about 1.5, 1.6 kilograms slaughter weight. And that's sufficient on our market. A lot of people are consuming that, and it's okay for us here. So I don't understand what it is on your market. You might need to make a few adjustments to bring it maybe to 42 days or maybe a little bit longer than that, depending on which country you're in. And so that means that you would have to feed the birds a little bit more food, so you need to calculate and change everything. And then when it comes to the labor, we're going to assume that your labor is free. What does that mean? You're going to be working inside the chickens yourself. Remember, you're trying to do everything on a budget. So if you're not going to be working yourself, then you're going to get someone, maybe a cousin, a sister, someone around who's actually going to help you to do that work inside the chicken house, so that it brings the cost down for you as much as possible. You don't want to pay for labor when you can actually work yourself or when you're on a very tight budget. So if we put the entire cost of raising these 500 broilers till the point of selling, it comes to about $1,364 and 24 cents. That's our figure. Next up, we're going to our sales. How much money you're actually going to be making from the sales. So the assumption here is that you're going to sell the birds as live birds, because again, remember, you're on a budget. If you're on a budget, that means you don't have the money to slaughter the bird. You don't have the money to buy a freezer and refrigerate the bird. So there's just no way you're going to be spending money on slaughtering and refrigerating. So you're going to sell the birds as live birds. The other thing that we're going to assume right here is that you actually had your market figured out. Yeah, you don't want to get in the birds and then start raising them and then start looking for market when the birds are 34 days old. That doesn't make sense. You need to make sure that you already have your market, you've secured your market, so that number one, they don't eat into your profit, because on day 37, if you're not selling those birds, actually starting day 36, you're losing money because they're going to be feeding more and more. So make sure that you've secured your market right at the beginning, so that you don't struggle selling them, keeping them around for long, and you don't have any money coming in. So when it comes to the market, currently in my country, a live broiler at around that weight will go for about $3.78. Now, this is not too low, this is not too high, it's just about right. In some places I've been to, it's significantly lower. In some places I've been to, it's actually a bit higher. But this is more of a reasonable price. $3.78, a reasonable price to sell on the market. So what that means is that when you sell your 500 broilers on the market, you're going to get $1,891 and 89 cents. That's cool, isn't it? So what that means is that you're going to have a profit of about $527 and 63 cents. Guys, I think that's insane. That's really crazy. Think about it, just 500 broilers, you're only keeping them for what? 5 weeks, and you're getting over $500. I feel like that's good. But we're going to make assumptions. Yeah, the assumptions are Number one, you raise the broilers very well. They were good quality birds, and you managed to raise them very well. They didn't get sick, they didn't get ill, because as soon as they start getting sick and ill, you're going to spend money on medication, things that we haven't budgeted for inside here. We have only planned for vaccines, and that's normal. There's no plan for medication here. Number two, if the birds are getting sick, they're going to grow slower, so they will take a longer time to reach the target weight, and then you're going to feed them for longer. They might even fail completely to reach the target weight. The third thing you're going to assume is that you fed the birds properly on proper quality feed at a low cost, at a really low cost. So that means that you bought the feed at as low a cost as you can get them. But number four is that your negotiation skills are very good, very good. You manage to actually get an acceptable price for the broilers, because like I said, if you struggle with the market, then you're going to get way lower prices, and that means your sales price is going to be lower and your profit is going to be lower. So these are the things that you pay emphasis to. Now, also remember that this is only the net profit for your very first batch. For your subsequent batches, you're not going to have the cost of building a chicken house and of buying equipment like the feeders and the drinkers. So that means that your subsequent flocks become significantly cheaper. So when it comes to your second batch, we shall take up the cost of the chicken house and the cost of the equipment, and that's about $265. And so what that means is that your profit on the next batch of birds will be about $792.63. Guys, that's crazy. That's really crazy. Imagine doing that on only your second batch of 500 chickens. That's really crazy. I feel like it's something really good. It's something good that you can start with. When you do this, it simply means that you can now get more money, reinvest first of all into the very same structure, or build another structure and bring in more birds into that structure, so that maybe every 2 weeks you're selling birds, you know, you're consistently selling, so that you don't lose your market. And maybe bring in even more and build bigger houses or more houses, so that every 1 week you're bringing in birds, so that it doesn't stress you and so that you're able to make money consistently. So tell me, comment in the comment section below, would you actually consider starting a broiler farm on a budget? Honestly, I feel like, yeah, anyone should be able to consider this. Anyone. I've shared a lot of videos on this channel about chickens, and I feel like it's nothing complicated. Anyone can start this. Also, I've shared about the cost of starting a 1,000 layer commercial farm. So if you want to consider and explore that, you can check it out. I'll leave a link to that video right here, so check it out. Catch you very soon with another video. Lots of love. Bye-bye.